Hi everyone, welcome back to Numinosophy Academy. I'm Lewis. In this channel we explore the beliefs which motivate us to live life in the way that we do. If that interests you, then please do subscribe to my channel. So today, for my sins, we're back on the FairMormon YouTube channel, reacting to 3 videos this time, all of which are in response to a section in the CES letter on the view of the Hebrews. So to start off this video, I thought we'd just quickly go through that section in the CES letter so we know what is being discussed. So as you can see, it begins with a side-by-side comparison of the view of the Hebrews and the Book of Mormon. Note that the View of the Hebrews was published in 1823, second edition 1825, Book of the Mormon published in 1830, both in Vermont. I think that's like opposite sides of Vermont. So this is really the key thing, the thematic similarities. So there's a whole list here. Hebrews leave the old world for the new world. Obviously pertinent. Encountering seas and many waters. Hebrew being the origin of Indian languages. What else? You get some similarities in language. Woe, woe to this city. Appearing in both books. Gospel preached in America. We have the denunciation of polygamy. We have the division of the Hebrews into 2 classes. The government's changed from monarchy to republic. And discussion of the United States itself. And then we have a short section which discusses the similarities. So the View of the Hebrews was written by the Reverend Ethan Smith, and Oliver Cowdery was a member of his congregation, who then later traveled to join his distant cousin, Joseph Smith, and as you probably know, helped Joseph Smith in the production of the Book of Mormon. So this would suggest that Joseph Smith was probably aware of the View of the Hebrews. You know, these ideas were being circulated and being discussed in 19th century America, which is, of course, odd, given that they appear in a book which was supposedly written about 1,000 years prior. There's a section here on the scholar. I thought he was a kind of lay historian of the LDS Church, Elder B.H. Roberts, who goes through the similarities himself and recognizes there's a problem there. What else? Yeah, I think where is it? Up here, it just emphasizes that it's not the word-for-word plagiarism, which is so much of an issue. It's more the thematic similarities. So anyway, as you can see, it's a pretty small section, so pretty surprising that FairMormon have managed to get 3 entire videos out of this, so it'll be interesting to hear what they have to say. So, we will get straight into that. Just as soon as you do me a favor and like this video for the YouTube algorithm, helps me out a lot. Okay, so we will begin.
This chapter on the alleged relationship of View of the Hebrews and the Book of Mormon is really important.
Many people have been led away to believe that supposed similarities in the Book of Mormon and View of the Hebrews are major evidences of Joseph Smith's plagiarism.
Okay, so straight away, supposed similarities. There are evidently thematic similarities. I mean, we've just looked at them for ourselves, so they're clearly there.
The only problem with this is that basically no one who has ever read View of the Hebrews could ever come away thinking that the 2 books had anything to do with each other.
Honestly, we don't even think Jeremy Runnels read View of the Hebrews before copying and pasting the Mormon Stories Facebook thread about it, because the claims are so easily debunked with like a little bit of reading.
Okay, well, very confident opener. Let's see where it takes us.
This episode is a book review, but don't worry, we're still gonna roast people.
View of the Hebrews, the golden nugget of anti-Mormonism, a fictional book connecting Native Americans to ancient Jews. In fact, the CES letter says this: There is a book published in 1823 Vermont entitled View of the Hebrews, and goes on to show the similarities between the two.
Now, here's the thing. This should be the most convincing argument against the Book of Mormon. This should pack a punch.
But if anything, it hits weaker than the Arizona Cardinals' offensive line.
Essentially, the CES letter makes the claim that both books are too similar for comfort. The CES letter even provides a chart of the similarities.
You see, right off the bat, this is hilarious. Runnels makes the claim that View of the Hebrews was published in 1823 and the Book of Mormon was published in 1830. Those are both true. He also notes that View of the Hebrews was published in Rutland County, Vermont, and the Book of Mormon was published in Windsor County, Vermont. The fact that these two cities are close to each other means nothing, because the Book of Mormon wasn't published in Vermont. It was published in New York.
Oh, you see, Jeremy Runnels is confused. Joseph Smith was born in Sharon, Vermont, but I don't think he was translating the Book of Mormon as a fetus.
It also notes that Oliver Cowdery was in Ethan Smith's congregation, Ethan Smith being a pastor in Vermont and the author of View of the Hebrews. That should make this concerning, right?
No, literally not at all. Oliver's family attended Ethan Smith's church while Ethan Smith was writing View of the Hebrews. There is no evidence that shows Ethan Smith talked to Oliver or even used his in-production manuscript of View of the Hebrews while delivering sermons at church.
So the first part of that is a pretty strong rebuttal. You'd have to kind of look up where people were at what time in order to really get down to the nib on that issue. But the fact that it wasn't published in Vermont, that's strong. However, you know, where Oliver Cowdery was, that I find that part less convincing. He must have been aware of what the book his pastor had written.
Church?
Let's take a look at what this would have meant. Oliver Cowdery would have been at a church in which Pastor Ethan Smith told his congregation about a book he was working on. Meanwhile, in New York, Joseph Smith was already working on a book about ancient Native Americans. During mid-translation, Oliver Cowdery comes to New York and just so happens to meet Joseph, who is working on a book similar to a book his pastor was writing about a few states away, and just said, hey, yeah, let's copy a guy named Smith in Vermont, and nobody will realize that we just switched the two.
This is what you call a conspiracy theory.
So there's a few leaps there. I don't think the point is being made that the Book of Mormon is a ripoff of View of the Hebrews. That's not what's being argued. What's being argued is that there are ideas that are in the View of the Hebrews which influenced and kind of infiltrated Joseph Smith's, thinking about the writing of the Book of Mormon.
It's nonsense.
It's about as trustworthy as the guy who says jet fuel can't melt steel beams.
The scattering of Israel and the restoration of the 10 tribes. This is the big thing people love to hit the Book of Mormon with. Before Joseph Smith, many people, including Ethan Smith, proposed that Native Americans were remnants of the 12 lost tribes. So then they say, the Book of Mormon just copied the old legends about Indians and the lost tribes. Isn't that right, Kwaku?
Yes, weird voice. It was the perfect time for Joseph Smith to add religiosity to a prominent myth about Native Americans being among the lost tribes of Israel. Ironically, the Book of Mormon isn't about that.
Well, okay, so I don't even know where to begin. There are narratives that were circulating in the 19th century. The View of the Hebrews is an example of some of those narratives, i.e. the lost tribes of Israel having some relationship with Native Americans, and that finds its way into the Book of Mormon, which could be coincidence, or it could suggest that ideas in 19th century America influenced the production of the Book of Mormon.
In 722 BC, the northern kingdom of Israel was split after the Assyrians killed Israelite rebels. That's 120 years before the Book of Mormon begins in the southern kingdom of Israel.
View of the Hebrews mentions the destruction of Israel and then goes to list the Roman leaders who quoted Jesus' prophecies about the fate of Israel. A bunch of the book is just Palestinian history. Half of the reasons the CES letter cites are just because both books draw from the Bible. Remember earlier when Runnels thought that Joseph Smith got the name Jerusalem from Jerusalem, New York instead of Jerusalem, the city in the Bible? Yeah, it's like that. He doesn't understand. Quoting biblical parallels is meaningless because it would suggest both found inspiration in the Bible, not each other. So when we eliminate the biblical parallels, the list of plagiarism is way smaller and anything remaining is easily debunked.
it's not. I do get his point. I think it's fair to a degree. Apart from, the way certain narratives are being discussed from the Bible is pertinent to particular areas. So the fact that there's such a big focus on the lost tribes of Israel in 19th century America, that is significant.
Something important to know is that View of the Hebrews isn't a story or a narrative scripture or literary work, like the Book of Mormon. It's an academic essay. Here's a quote. In the year 55 arose a notable Egyptian importer named Felix. 30,000 followed him under the persuasion that from Mount Olivet they should see the walls of Jerusalem fall to the ground at his command. For their easy capture of the Roman garrison there and their taking of the possession of Jerusalem, they were attacked by the Roman governor. 400 were slain and the rest were dispersed. The Egyptian importer then named Felix, for a great low rate you can get online, go to the governor and say, in time. That's why I don't even try to believe in all the yoke. Because if you do, then you didn't. See, it's boring.
The majority of people who think View of the Hebrews discredits the Book of Mormon don't realize that it isn't another story.
Again, it doesn't prove anything. The claim wasn't being made that it was plagiarized word for word. Whether it's boring or not doesn't mean that there's not thematic similarities.
It's an essay.
But don't both books say that ancient Jews sailed to America and became natives? No, they don't. View of the Hebrews proposes that some of the lost tribes may have entered into ancient America via the Bering Strait. It tells you nothing about the specific people who may have come. The Book of Mormon narrative is that a small family flees Jerusalem, wanders in the wilderness, and builds a boat, and sailed to the American continent. It's very different.
It's not very different. I think, reading one and creatively producing the second as a kind of something built upon the first seems to follow very naturally in my mind.
Religion, a motivating factor. Well, in the Book of Mormon, it's because Lehi has a vision of the destruction of Jerusalem. And View of the Hebrews, a proposed theory in an academic essay, suggests that some of the lost tribes went to this part of the world because they were split. Not very similar motivating factors.
Migration's long journey. Yes, but by this logic, the film Prince of Egypt must have copied Lord of the Rings. In the Book of Mormon, there are long journeys and short journeys. This is a meaningless point.
Encounter seas of many waters. Well, in View of the Hebrews, the word seas is mentioned 6 times, because when telling the history of Palestine, sometimes you'll need to reference bodies of water. The Book of Mormon also contains the word seas. So does the Chronicles of Narnia. So does this Arkansas textbook from 1998. So does this bill proposed to Congress.
But what about many waters? That's a really specific term, right?
Okay, fair
Seas
enough.
is general, anyone can use that, but why is many waters in View of the Hebrews?
Oh, Brett, it isn't. It never appears in View of the Hebrews. Jeremy Runnels just made that up.
Oh, it's typical of a
Okay, all right, Brett. Did you both books say that the Americas were uninhabited when the Jews came?
View of the Hebrews makes that.
Are the personal attacks really necessary?
Claim. The Book of Mormon doesn't. It never claims Lehi's tribe was the tribe was the first one to be here. In fact, the Book of Mormon states that the Jaredites got there before Lehi did by hundreds and hundreds of years, and nowhere in the Book of Mormon does it claim that America was uninhabited when the Jaredites arrived. Also, the Jaredites were not of the house of Israel, so even if Runnels was referencing them, it doesn't make sense because he's arguing about Israeli Indian theory.
I'm pretty sure the idea that America was empty is pretty explicit in the early Mormon faith. I'd need to look up the reference for that. But didn't Joseph Smith believe that the Americas were empty? I'm sure there's something about that.
Settlers journey northward. Well, yeah, in the Book of Mormon, the settlers and tribes go north and south and east and west. That's kind of how directions work.
Yeah, there's no way Joseph could have known about directions without View of the Hebrews. Everyone knows compasses didn't exist before the CES letter was put online by our saint and savior, Jeremy Runnels.
Oh, the anger is ridiculous. So anyway, 1 down, 2 to go. Let's jump straight in. Video 2.
Encounter a valley of a great river. The closest thing to this in View of the Hebrews is on page 106, in reference to the Bering Strait. It says this: other tribes assure us that their remote fathers, on their way to this country, came to a great river.
And seriously, like, if Jeremy Reynolds wants to use a river and a valley as a basis for plagiarism, then by that logic, Mark Twain plagiarized Tom Sawyer from the Book of Mormon.
A unity of race, Hebrews, settle the land and are the ancestral origin of American Indians. Oh, give me
Little stab there at Mark Twain, who I'm pretty sure was not a fan of Mormons himself.
a break. The whole point of View of the Hebrews is that Ethan Smith really believes that the lost tribes of Israel, over 100 years before the Book of Mormon begins, traveled through the Bering Strait to get to the Americas. The Book of Mormon barely says anything about the 10 tribes as ancestors of the natives, and it focuses on the not lost tribes of Judah and Joseph for the people of Lehi and Mulek. The Book of Mormon never says that the Jaredites or Nephites were the first people on the continent.
Prophets, spiritually gifted men, transmit generational records. Literally not at all. View of the Hebrews directly contradicts the Book of Mormon here. It doesn't hold any ancient natives as prophets. In fact, View of the Hebrews states explicitly, we are to expect no new revelation from heaven, whereas the Book of Mormon has continuous prophets after Christ. As for generational records, transmitted in View of the Hebrews, not true. Literally just isn't even in there.
To be fair, there is one supposed Indian prophet mentioned in View of the Hebrews. Ethan Smith references the ancient American legend of Quetzalcoatl. The CES letter states that Quetzalcoatl, the white-bearded Mexican messiah, visits the Americans. Here's the thing. This legend was known about in Joseph Smith's lifetime. It isn't in the Book of Mormon. And why isn't it, Brad?
Well, because Joseph didn't copy View of the Hebrews. Also, Ethan Smith thought Quetzalcoatl was Moses, not Jesus.
Once again, it's not that... They seem to be really struggling to understand this. It's not that the Book of Mormon has been copied from the View of the Hebrews. That's not what's being said. What's being said is there are ideas that were being circulated in 19th century America, such as some of the ones referenced here. Now, it's not the case that those ideas, are totally unique to the View of the Hebrews. It's just that they were in common parlance. So it's odd that those ideas in common parlance cropped up in the Book of Mormon. That's just odd. It's not a smoking gun, I don't think. They said that at the beginning. I don't think that's really being suggested that it is a smoking gun. It's one part of a much larger puzzle which undermines the credibility of the Book of Mormon. I think that's the point here.
Wasn't an Indian messiah. Now, Runnels is just being purposely misleading here. The CES letter is trying to push the conspiracy that Quetzalcoatl, a snake with wings,
lying down on his little snake belly,
is actually a white man who Ethan Smith thought represented Moses,
who is on the Lord's side,
which turns into Jesus in the Book of Mormon.
I'm done, I'm pissed, and I'm not putting up with it anymore.
That's what happens when you crowdsource your information from anti-Christian neckbeards on Reddit.
I don't know why I allowed myself to imagine that the FairMormon response to the CES letter would have been a bit more imaginative and constructive. It's so childish and offensive and boring. It's so boring. They think the View of the Hebrews is boring. They are being so boring. Just going through these similarities and saying, well, you think there's a similarity, but actually the similarity is really minimal, so... Oh, okay, well, we're nearly through it. We're on the third video now. We're nearly there. We can make it.
This is essentially a repeat of the Sacred Towers argument. View of the Hebrews does not mention towers in the Americas. However, it does mention war, like the Book of Mormon, and like ancient war, military fortifications are present, as well as observations. Yes, people observe things. That's how eyes work.
No, he hasn't read the Book of Mormon. The wicked fall by the wicked. Just read Mormon 4:5.
Now, we've already covered a part of this, so let's break down some of the last arguments of this section.
The CES letter says that this direct link between Joseph and Oliver and the view of the Hebrews demonstrates that Joseph is very likely to have been aware of both the theme and the content of that book. It also gives weight, so much weight, to the similarities described in the preceding comparison chart. Take a look. It's in PDF form.
Nope. And if he did have access to it, he did a terrible job copying it. Did Ethan Smith's view of the Hebrews furnish structural material for Joseph Smith's Book of Mormon? It has been pointed out in these pages that there are many things in the former book that might well have suggested many major things in the other.
Boring! B.H. Roberts was an early church leader who investigated arguments against the Book of Mormon. The quote, it was in the thing. It's provided to him, but what he was trying to do is he was showing that, like, this is what the dummies would say, but he was saying, like, because he defended.
Okay, so again, tiresome, but actually I think he's just wrong about that. My understanding is that B.H. Roberts, through the research that he did, investigating the books, investigating the problems with the Book of Mormon, actually lost his faith or his belief or his testimony that the Book of Mormon was really translated by Joseph Smith. Now, he didn't fall away from the church because instead he just moved to a slightly more liberal or progressive understanding concerning the Book of Mormon, understanding it to be inspired as opposed to translated. And being inspired means that, you know, a human dimension can enter more easily into the Book of Mormon because it's actually being written by Joseph Smith. And therefore, although it's inspired, although it's of God, as far as Roberts is concerned, it allows for these influences which were present in the 19th century, such as this one influence, view of the Hebrews, to enter in and appear in the Book of Mormon. I find that the most credible explanation for how the Book of Mormon came about. And as Roberts demonstrated, I think it is still possible to hold that view of the Book of Mormon and still believe it to be of God.
Defended the Book of Mormon.
Yeah, you know what I'm saying. I'm not being cordial anymore.
The CES letter is toilet paper.
The CES letter claims that Joseph Smith plagiarized the late war by Gilbert J. Hunt.
It's a history of the War of 1812, which is obviously so similar to the Book of Mormon.
Wait, Brad, I thought he copied View of the Hebrews.
Oh, yeah, definitely. He also copied the Spiderwick Chronicles, Junie B. Jones, and Frindle.
Like Frindle, like the pen, he's like, fun. Let's break down these claims.
Here we have Runnels saying, the late war between the United States and Great Britain. This book was an 1819 textbook written for New York State school children. The book depicted the events of the War of 1812 and was specifically written in a Jacobean English style, like French Revolution stuff, you know, to imitate the King James Bible. Those charlatans. This affected scriptural style was calculated to elevate the moral themes. That's cheating. That is cheating.
Yes, both the Book of Mormon and the Late War use King James style English. One is inspired to read in accordance with the Bible, the other is written in likeness to the Bible. The common denominator here is the Bible. This doesn't prove the Book of Mormon copied the Late War.
This first chapter...
No, it doesn't prove it, but it just suggests that it was a 19th century literary trope to write books that were in the style of the King James Version of the Bible, as they said, in order to kind of, elevate it and give it more grandeur. And, you know, if the Book of Mormon was the ingenious creation of Joseph Smith, then he used this King James language to elevate it and give it that spiritual, holy, elevated feel that we get when we read it.
Alone is stunning. So much more stunning than Katy Perry's new album, as it reads incredibly like the Book of Mormon. That fraudulent Joe Smith with his golden plates. Can't even eat off of them.
Again, this is King James English. If Jeremy's caption had said, the first chapter alone is stunning as it reads incredibly like the King James Bible, you'd say, That's not stunning. It's deliberately supposed to read like the King James Bible. And both the Late War and View of the Hebrews draw from the King James Bible.
To comment more on the Late War is the author, Gilbert J. Hunt.
I'm Gilbert J. Hunt. Let's take the next few minutes to focus on some parallels with the Book of Mormon, gifted to us by the CES letter, my favorite brand of toilet paper after Charmin. Devices of curious workmanship in relation to boats and weapons. I do use the phrase curious workmanship when I'm referencing guns. And I quote, "And their weapons of war were of curious workmanship, and they sent forth balls of lead." However, the Book of Mormon doesn't actually mention weapons of curious workmanship or guns. It says, "And they did make all manner of weapons of war, and they did work all manner of work of exceedingly curious workmanship," which is just not the same thing. Essentially, both use the phrase curious and workmanship, which...
Okay, so I think I've, reached the end of my tether with this one. Basically, the apologetics defense from the Mormons is that they weren't word for word plagiarized, and therefore no plagiarism took place. Which, of course, is not the claim the CES letter is even making. The claim is that there are themes that were present and part of society in the 19th century, appearing in literature, being discussed, which then find their way into the Book of Mormon, which is strange given that the Book of Mormon purports to have been written 1,000 years prior. Now, does that totally disprove the legitimacy or the authorial legitimacy of the Book of Mormon? No, that alone doesn't. It just raises an eyebrow. It's concerning. So, not much more to say on that topic. I don't find their defense of the Book of Mormon convincing at all. I found the 3 videos weak and, as I said, boring. But anyway, we made it. We got to the end of these videos. Thanks for watching, everyone. If you enjoyed this content, please do like my video, subscribe to my channel, again, if you haven't done so already, and hit the bell so that you don't miss out on upcoming videos. Thanks again, and I will see you in the next one.